Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to session 4. It's Professor Kellenhofer again. Hello, I hope you're doing well. We're going to try this one on my iPhone and see if it comes out at all. But of course, we'll have to be a little bit cautious, a little bit quiet. My son is asleep in the back seat, and I am sitting in the car waiting for him to wake up. This week, we're looking at two things. We're looking at plot, and we're looking at Edgar Allan Poe, and in specific, his short story, Edgar Allan Poe's short story, Cask of Amontillado. So let's start out with plot. Plot is a simple feature, an element of literature. Literature can be broken down into 5 pieces. We look at literature as far as what the plot is, what the character is, what the setting is, what the theme is, and finally, in some cases, what the style is. And as we go through each session, we're going to start breaking these things down. In this session, we look at plot. Plot is the what. What happened in the story, poem, or drama that we're looking at. If plot is the what, then character would be the who. Setting would be the where and the when. Theme would also be why. Why did it happen? And finally, style might be how. How did it happen? Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Plot, what happened. And plot is simply the story. That what was going on. In many cases, this is the simplest portion of the literature. Plot, in many cases, is just a simple sequence of events, sometimes moved out of order, sometimes a little bit hidden, but in most cases, plot is the simplest thing. In a lot of cases, people buy their literature based on plot. We look for plot. Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, most times we want to know what happened. Thrillers by James Patterson. And so popular fiction a lot of times works off of plot. Literature in a lot of times works off of theme. What is the theme of this piece of literature? And so, let's look at some of the plots we've seen. Raymond Carver's Cathedral. What is the plot here? A man is expecting a visitor who is blind. The visitor comes. They have a tense but large dinner with the man and his wife. The wife is tense but falls asleep. The man and the blind visitor drink, smoke marijuana, and then draw pictures together. That's the plot. There doesn't seem to be anything of value there. Hills Like White Elephants. A couple on a train ride between Madrid and Barcelona, I think, stop at a train station for a drink. They're having a conversation which can be interpreted as a conversation about getting an abortion, and we don't see how it ends. This week's reading, Edgar Allan Poe, has a much deeper plot, but not that much deeper. We see what happens. So plot. Plot is those things which happen, and oftentimes there's very little juice and detail in that. So plot is one of those items that as we go through, we must know it, we must understand it, but of course, oftentimes it's not the most valuable piece. Your book this week is going to also talk about pacing. Pacing is the timing at which the events in the plot occur. And pacing is very important. In the modern world, we are getting a faster and faster pace. People want a faster paced plot. And so, that's what we're seeing with action movies. However, if the plot is paced too quickly, then it's frenetic and people have trouble following it. If the plot is paced too slowly, then people get bored. So pacing is a very important piece of plot and a very important part of making a successful work.
Hello again. He woke up, so we brought him inside. Now he's asleep, and we're back inside. Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe is one of the most important writers from the American tradition. He's probably one of the most important writers to ever have lived. Poe is an American. He lived in the Victorian era, and he's famous for his short stories. He's famous for his horror stories, and some poetry too. Perhaps at some point, some English teacher in your life made you read The Raven. as I wandered, pondered, weak and weary, and all that sort of stuff. And so Edgar Allan Poe is our reading this week. Talking about Edgar Allan Poe's fame, Edgar Allan Poe is famous for being a citizen of the city of Baltimore, and now the NFL team, the Baltimore Ravens, is named after his famous poem. So you don't get much more famous in modern America than having an NFL team named after you. So Poe's work, particularly in this case with the Cask of Amontillado, is essentially the subgenre of horror. We look at it as horror because the themes are often designed to terrify the reader. In this case, Poe uses Cask of Amontillado to terrify the reader into considering some of the terrors wandering around. So this session is about plot. So what is the plot of Cask? The plot of Cask involves two men, Montressor and Fortunato. Montressor is our narrator, and he tells us that Fortunato has very often injured him, but recently has moved on into insult. And he says when Fortunato's 1,000 injuries he could endure, but when he moved on to insults, he knew something had to be done. And so this is a story about revenge. It's a story about how this one man that we're reading plots his revenge. And his revenge, ultimately, the plot is very simple. He meets his prey, Fortunato, outside of a carnival. And a carnival is not a carnival as we think of it these days. We'll have to think about that in a minute. But he meets him outside of a carnival. He tricks him. He talks about a Cask of Amontillado, which is a wine. And he tricks Fortunato into coming back into his house to see if he was duped or not. But all of this is Montressor's trick. And what he'll do is get the drunken Fortunato into his home, down into his wine cellar. In the back of his wine cellar, there is a niche, a cave, and he walks his victim back there, ties a chain around his waist, locks him there, and then bricks him up brick by brick. And then the very last lines, we find out that Fortunato has been down there for the past 50 years. This is his vengeance. So it's a pretty simple plot, but when we look at it, there's a great deal of things going on. In particular, what's going on with the insults or injuries. And this is oftentimes where I ask students, well, what injuries and insults are listed here? The answer is there are none. And that's where the horror lays. We don't look at this piece as a piece of, wow, there's a terror in, well, you can look at it as you want. There's a terror in the way that he murders Fortunato. The terror is in his reasons for murdering Fortunato. And since those reasons aren't enumerated for us, that's where the terror of imagination comes in. What is revenge? And when do we need revenge? Is revenge somebody has harmed your family? Or is revenge somebody has bumped into you at a club? And so that's the terror. The idea that all these people out here looking around yourself and seeing all these people everywhere, that some of them could be plotting. Some of them could be thinking about ways to destroy you because they feel you've injured or insulted them in some way that you haven't even noticed. Poe is afraid of people, terrified of people. And so that is where he ends up. Is he wants the reader to think about all of the crazy people around him, all of those crazy people who may be plotting something you haven't even thought about. Well, there's two things to consider here, though. And one of the first things is gender study, as we talked about last week, and I gave you a preview of this, last session, that there are two male characters here. And the idea of revenge, how much revenge do we need as men? What is the purpose of vengeance if you're a man? Insult, being insulted by someone, requires this level of revenge. And so there's this whole gender study idea, this masculine idea going on here, and that perhaps Montressor has gone off the rails with his ideas. He's gone crazy in his idea of what it means to be a man. And very often what it means to be a man is the ability to defend yourself, the ability to do well physically in a fight and to have people respect you. Such an important part of being male. Respected. And when somebody disrespects you, what do you do? And in some cases, do you chain them in your basement and leave them there for 50 years? Maybe that's an issue. So this can be a gender study issue here when we talk about males and how males deal with each other. The expectations of respect between men, how men deal with their emotions, and how men deal and how men associate violence with respect and ultimately emotional issues. So often we find that the psychoanalytical portion of masculine interaction in talking to men, when it leads to insult, when it leads to hurt, when it leads to pain, then thus leads to the solution to that pain being an act of violence. So there's a few ideas for your papers. The idea that Fortunato and Montresor, the idea that that whole piece, Cask of Amontillado, is about being male and the pressures of being male and how someone could go awry in the idea of pursuing respect. Another very interesting issue of this is the setting. The setting is carnival. Carnival is a interesting thing. Modern carnivals are these things that the church puts on, and you go to the parking lot, and you get your cotton candy, and go on the Ferris wheel and hope it doesn't fall apart. But carnival comes from the tradition, the Catholic tradition of course, Lent. Mardi Gras and Carnival are those parties which occur before Catholic Christians give up something for Lent. Fat Tuesday, Mardi Gras, these are things where if you're going to give up French fries, you eat a ton of French fries on Fat Tuesday because on Ash Wednesday you've got to give them up. And so Mardi Gras is that last party you go to before you make your way into being a little bit better. Ash Wednesday and the whole Easter season, the whole season of rebirth. And so we find out that the two characters meet at carnival. Well, the term carnival, carne, meat, chili con carne, meat, carnage, corpses, bodies. The term carne is Latin for corpse, body, meat. And so a carnival was in fact a pre-Lenten event that occurred wherein a great deal of physical, sexual, violent pursuits could be done right before we ask for God's forgiveness. So when you put that in context of a man plotting murder, well, the setting becomes highly interesting and intriguing. So always make sure when you're reading these pieces that you understand the littlest things. To say that it's a carnival, well, that's telling you something. And Poe's version of a carnival, Poe's lifetime, is very different than ours. So always make sure when you read these, you take a look through some background material, maybe through an encyclopedia, and keep those ideas in mind. If you have any questions, any comments, please send them forward.